In this video, I'll be taking a look back at the Roger Moore era of the franchise. Let's get started. So Roger Moore, born in 1927 in London, was the only child of his policeman father and Indian mother. After initially being interested in working in animation, Moore came to the attention of filmmaker Brian Desmond Hurst, who cast Moore as an extra in his film Caesar and Cleopatra, released in 1945. Afterwards, Hurst funded Moore's fees to study at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, where he spent 3 terms. Interestingly, while there, Moore met his future Bond co-star Louis Maxwell, who would go on to play Miss Moneypenny in the Bond series. After being conscripted for a few years in military service, Moore worked as a model before leaving for America, where he had several small roles in MGM films like The Last Time I Saw Paris, The King's Thief, and Diane, where he worked with the likes of Elizabeth Taylor and Nana Turner. He was eventually released from his contract with MGM for, in his own words, being no bloody good. Moore would find greater success on television, where he starred in many TV series like Ivanhoe, The Alaskans, and Maverick. But it was really when Moore landed the role of the Saint in 1962 that he became a huge star. This series was the one that really established Moore's trademark suave and sophisticated style and light sense of humour that he would use to great effect later on in the Bond series. The show ran for 6 seasons, and Moore then went on to make The Persuaders with Tony Curtis. During his time on these shows, Moore's name had been in consideration several times for the role of James Bond by producers Albert Broccoli and Harvey Saltzman. Moore had always been unavailable due to his commitment to his various TV projects, but when Sean Connery finally seemed to quit the Bond role for good after Diamonds Are Forever in 1971, Moore was suddenly available due to the cancellation of The Persuaders. Moore accepted Broccoli's invitation to join the series in August 1972, and became the 3rd actor in the official series to become
Bond. James Bond.
Looking back now, it's hard to believe that they replaced Connery with someone who was actually older. Moore was 3 years older than Sean Connery, but even at 46, Moore had a very youthful appearance compared to Connery, who looked much older than the 40 years of age he was when filming Diamonds Are Forever in 1971. Moore would go on to star in no less than 7 official Bond films, an all-time record that still stands to this day. But the question remains, just how good was Moore's Bond tenure? Let's take a look back at all 7 films and see how they hold up. Released in 1973, Live and Let Die was directed by Guy Hamilton and was based on Ian Fleming's 1954 novel of the same name. The plot involves Bond investigating the deaths of 3 British agents, which leads him to a Harlem drug lord named Mr. Big, who was planning on distributing a new form of heroin for free to force drug barons out of business, and then become a monopoly supplier. Bond's investigation leads him to the island of San Monique, where he encounters a ruthless dictator named Kananga, played by Yaphet Kotto, who is involved in what appears to be black magic, and a beautiful psychic solitaire, played by Jane Seymour. Released at the height of the blaxploitation era, where movies like Shaft and Across 110th Street were hugely popular, Live and Let Die marked a huge turning point for the series, and had featured an established star in Roger Moore, who would go on to lead the series through the 1970s and most of the 80s. Not only did the series finally leave the Connery era behind, it would also not feature the criminal organisation Spectre, or Bond's nemesis Ernst Stavro Blofeld, whom with the exception of 1964's Goldfinger, had been in a feature of every Bond film up to this point. What I've always found interesting is how the movie introduces Roger Moore's Bond in such a low-key fashion. He's not featured in the pre-title sequence, and when we first see him he's, appropriately enough I guess, at home in bed with a beautiful woman. What follows is a very amusing scene where Bond gets his mission briefing from M while trying to hide the fact that he's got a woman in his bedroom. It's a nice and funny change of pace from the usual mission briefing scenes, and it's a great business as usual way of introducing Moore's Bond to the audience. It's also unique in that Bond gets his gadgets from MoneyPay, in this case a magnetic watch for once, instead of Q, who was absent from this film as the actor Desmond Llewellyn was unavailable due to filming a TV show. After the outlandish and large-scale plots of previous Bond films like You Only Live Twice and Diamonds Are Forever, this movie marked a kind of back-to-basics approach in terms of its scope. The storyline of Bond getting involved with drug kingpins and less reliance on gadgets felt like a deliberate attempt to reduce the scale of the movies. This was also evident in the movie reverting to less cinematic 1:8:5:1 widescreen format. Since the release of Thunderball in 1965, films have been shot in a more cinema-friendly Panavision format. This means Live and Let Die has more of a TV movie quality compared to some of its predecessors. There's been some speculation that this had been a result of the producers cutting down the cost of producing these movies, since Moore hadn't proved himself yet to be a box office draw as Bond. Roger Moore gives a terrific performance here in his first Bond film. He is suave, sophisticated, and brings his trademark light sense of humour to the role. He makes it seem also effortless, and he convinces the viewer that he's been playing this role for many years. Moore went to great lengths not to portray Bond in the same way Sean Connery did, even down to the way he introduced himself in his movies.
My name's Bond. James Bond.
While there were still some lingering Connery-esque aspects of the character that didn't suit Moore's portrayal on screen, such as his way of getting information out of female characters, this was more of a writing problem than Moore's. We'll come back to that later in this video. As for the film itself, it's not one of my favourite entries in the series. The film does feel like the producers are scaling certain aspects of the series back here, but the film still offers plenty of action, from a terrific double-decker bus chase to the extremely long speedboat chase, which is impressive, but could have been cut down in editing. The best stunt involves Bond escaping crocodiles by running across their heads, which the stuntman performed for real, and one take had a narrow escape when one of the crocs snapped at his heel and tore his trousers. It was good to see the series moving away from using Spectre and Ernst Stavro Blofeld with this film. They had been used way too often in the series at this point, and yet Koto's Kananga is one of the most interesting villains of the series. The fact that he believes in dark magic and voodoo is a unique character trait for a Bond villain, and Koto plays him as a man who veers from being insanely angry at one moment to laughing with glee the next. His henchman Teehee is one of my favourites of the Moore era. He's extremely funny and threatening at the same time, and is much more memorable and scary than Jaws ultimately turned out to be a few films later. Jane Seymour's Bond girl Solitaire is both beautiful and mysterious. Seymour plays the character as somewhat naive, but who actually does believe in magic. In fact, the movie itself is unique in the fact that it neither confirms or denies whether it exists in this universe. The final shot of the movie itself, which features a voodoo priest laughing maniacally on the outside of a train, is either just a silly joke, or the movie itself confirming that black magic is real. It's up to the viewer to decide. Since the movies at this point were heading in a more light-hearted comedy direction, partly to appeal more to American audiences, Live and Let Die introduced Sheriff J.W. Pepper of the Louisiana State Police, who gets into all kinds of comedy hijinks during the speedboat chase. This is a character who's either loved or hated by Bond fans, and I have to say that I fall into the former category. I think he adds a real sense of fun to this section of the movie. It can be argued that his character was unnecessary, as they already had Roger Moore, who was going to bring a lot of comedy anyway, but I don't care. I think it's really funny.
Peach, I got it! What are you? Some kind of doomsday machine, boy!
The movie climaxes with a rather cheap-looking, I might say, final confrontation with Bond and Kananga, the latter himself being killed off in the most ridiculous scene of the entire series, with him literally blowing up like a balloon. Seriously, what were they thinking? The movie makes up for it though, with a good final fight with Teehee on a train just before the end credits. I actually would have preferred this character to come back rather than Jaws later on, but that's just me. So overall, Live and Let Die was an unspectacular but decent first outing for Roger Moore as James Bond. Audiences really seemed to enjoy the film, as it did great business at the box office. So much that the producers, excited at the prospect that the franchise could live on without Sean Connery, fast-tracked the next film to come up the next year. This would turn out to be a mistake, however, with the reception of Moore's second Bond film. Released in 1974, The Man with the Golden Gun was once again directed by Guy Hamilton, his fourth and final of the series. The plot involves Bond attempting to track down the assassin of Francisco Scaramanga, played by Christopher Lee, a man who uses a golden gun who Bond believes has threatened to kill him. Bond also attempts to find a Solex agitator, a device that can be a solution to energy shortages, which was a real-world problem at the time. Bond's mission takes him to the likes of Hong Kong and Thailand, where he teams up with fellow agent Mary Goodnight, played by Britt Eklund, and Scaramanga's mistress Andrea, played by Maud Adams. This movie was notable in that it was the first time in the series that an actor besides Sean Connery had returned to play the role of 007 more than once. With Moore established in the role and proven to be quite popular with audiences, this movie was rushed out the next year to capitalise on its success, which in my opinion was a mistake. Like the previous film before it, Man with the Golden Gun has a very cheap TV movie look compared to previous entries in the series. This film was also a case of the Bond series attempting to cash in on what was popular in cinema at the time. in this case martial arts movies like Enter the Dragon and Fist of Fury. This is most evident in one of my favourite scenes of the movie, where Bond's captured and must fight various martial arts experts at a karate dojo. It's completely ridiculous, but it's really funny, and results in one of the best visual gags of the movie. At this stage, while Roger Moore was giving a good performance as Bond, the writers were still not writing entirely to the actor's strengths. There are several scenes that appear like they were written for Sean Connery's tougher portrayal of the character. This is most evident while it's probably the most blatant scene of sexism in the entire series, as Bond walks in on Andrea as she is taking a shower before interrogating her in her hotel room. Moore reportedly hated filming this scene, as he felt his interpretation of Bond wouldn't resort to hitting women. As Roger Moore said in his biography, "It's in character for Bond, but it wasn't very Roger Moore Bond." Thankfully, by the next movie they had properly figured out how to write the scenes between Bond and women more to Moore's liking. He was a lover more than a fighter. This movie does have one of Roger Moore's favourite lines of dialogue as Bond. As 007 is questioning Gunsmith to find out more about Scaramanga, he turns one of his own rifles on him.
I'm now aiming precisely at your groin. It says, speak, or forever hold your peace.
While this isn't one of the best Bond movies, Christopher Lee's Scaramanga is one of the best Bond villains. Lee was already a living legend in the film industry at this stage of his career, and was actually Bond creator Ian Fleming's step-cousin, who had actually suggested Lee for the part of Dr. No in the first film of the series. Lee takes a character that isn't necessarily the best written or ambitious in the series, and makes him so interesting. This is a man who's almost like a dark mirror image of Bond. He's a man of culture who has exquisite tastes, and unlike a lot of Bond villains, has a lot of respect for 007. The reveal that he actually had no intention of threatening Bond, and it was actually his mistress who had sent one of his golden bullets to Bond, is a good twist. Scaramanga actually comes across as a fan of Bond for most of the film, and you can sense the disappointment, but deadly intention he has to kill Bond on his island where the climax takes place.
See, Mr. Bond, like every great artist, I want to create an indisputable masterpiece once in my lifetime. The death of 007. Mano a mano. A duel between titans. My golden gun against your Walther PPK.
6 bullets to your 1.
I only need 1.
Unfortunately though, I think Lee is ultimately wasting this film. Here you had a great actor playing one of the most interesting Bond villains, but the final duel between the two is very anticlimactic in my opinion. Which is a shame, as there seems to be more footage of the final duel that was shot but was never used. Some of this unused footage can be seen in some of the trailers. Scaramanga's henchman, Knick-Knack, is also a bit of a joke. This character was played by Hervé Villechaize, is amusing in some scenes, and when you come to think about it, would actually be effective as an assassin in certain situations, as most people wouldn't suspect a midget and wouldn't find him threatening. Bond's final fight with Knick-Knack on Scaramanga's boat is completely ridiculous though, and wouldn't look out of place in an Austin Powers film. This movie also saw the return of Sheriff J.W. Pepper, who just happens to be on holiday in Thailand where Bond is at the time. He gets involved in a car chase between Bond and Scaramanga, and again I don't care what anyone else says, I think he's really funny. This is where the famous, or infamous depending on how you look at it, corkscrew car jump takes place. It was the first stunt of its kind that was ever attempted and made the Guinness Book of Records. However, this was a rare example of composer John Barry almost ruining an action scene, as he included a slide whistle sound effect, which in most fans' opinions undercuts the excitement of the scene. Overall, The Man with the Golden Gun is an enjoyable Bond film, but it's one of the weaker entries in the series. The critical and box office reception is muted, and for a while there was a sense that the future of the series was in doubt. Albert Broccoli took producing control of the series after this film, as his business partner Harry Saltzman sold his share in the series. Broccoli would have to pull out all the stops and go big with the next film to ensure the future of the James Bond movies. And that's exactly what he did 3 years later. Released in 1977, The Spy Who Loved Me was directed by Lewis Gilbert, who had directed the earlier Bond film You Only Live Twice in 1967. The plot involves Bond investigating the disappearance of British and Russian nuclear submarines. This leads him into conflict with Karl Stromberg, a reclusive megalomaniac who threatens to destroy the world in a nuclear holocaust and start a new civilization underneath the sea. Bond teams up with a female Russian agent, Anya Masita, played by Barbara Bach, and must fight Stromberg's massive henchman, Jaws, played by Richard Kiel, who has metal teeth. And on a personal note, this is my favourite James Bond film of all time. Now, as the synopsis suggests, the scale of this Bond film was huge. After the last couple of relatively small-scale entries in the series, The Spy Who Loved Me was an epic film in every way. The film returned to shooting the widescreen Panavision format, and the film featured massive stakes. This is the first time that James Bond literally had to save the world. Huge sets, including not only Stromberg's massive underwater base, Atlantis, but the inside of his supertanker, Lippris, which captures submarines, and was so huge, it required the construction of an all-new soundstage in England, which was named the 007 stage. This set, which is the location of the massive battle between joint British, American and Russian forces against Stromberg's army, still looks amazing to this day. On top of all that, we get the signature Roger Moore vehicle of the Bond series, the Lotus Esprit, which is involved in one of the best car chases of the series, where Bond is chased by cars, motorbikes, helicopters, but also the Lotus turns into a submarine which Bond uses in an underwater battle against Stromberg's divers. This is the movie where the series went truly big in terms of its pre-title action sequences. While previous Bond films began with a small mini-adventure before the main credits, they were usually something relatively small scale, like fistfights in a small room. The Spy Who Loved Me begins with a fantastic ski chase, as Bond is pursued by Soviet agents in Austria. The sequence ends with one of the most amazing stunts in film history, as Bond skis off a massive cliff and opens his parachute after what seems like he's falling to his death. At a premiere screening attended by Prince Charles of Wales, the audience burst into applause and gave the film a standing ovation just for this scene alone. It was here in his third Bond film that Roger Moore truly came into his own as 007. While he was already good in the role, he gave one of his best performances in The Spy Who Loved Me. This is the definitive Roger Moore Bond performance. He's charming, he's witty, he delivers the one-liners the only way Roger Moore can, and he's clearly having the time of his life here. Even when he's killing bad guys, he's very polite about it.
Where's Peckish? Where's Peckish?
Pyramids!
What a helpful chap.
Moore himself is on record as saying that this was his favourite Bond film he made, and I have to agree with him. Writers also finally figured out how to write his interactions with women that wouldn't come across as being like Sean Connery. Moore's Bond seduced women to get the information he wants. Although, to be fair, like Connery, he also uses them as human shields.
No!
Barbara Bach is, in my opinion, the best of the Moore-era Bond girls. She's not just gorgeous, but she's a capable agent herself, and her interactions with Moore are some of the highlights of the film. The subplot of her wanting to get revenge on the agent who killed her previous lover adds an element of tension to the story, which comes to a head in one of the best scenes of the film, where she finds 007 was responsible. Moore tended to be underrated by some of his critics as a dramatic actor, and this scene in particular was one of his best, which showed he was actually just as good at the dramatic scenes as he was in the comedic ones.
In our business, Anya, people get killed. We both know that. So did he. It was either him or me. The answer to the question is yes. I did kill him.
Also, this movie was where they finally started acknowledging the events of On Her Majesty's Secret Service, where Bond got married and his wife was killed. Bond's trademark calm demeanour slips ever so slightly when Amassada mentions it, and Moore plays it brilliantly with a touch of both anger and sadness. It's a welcome bit of continuity and conclusive proof that the Bond is a codename theory held by some fans doesn't hold up. Richard Kiel's Jaws is one of the most famous henchmen of the series. After the joke that was Knick-Knack and Man with the Golden Gun, Jaws, in the earlier scenes at least, is a frightening villain. The scenes where he kills Takesh and Calva are staged like something out of a horror film. It's just a shame that later on Jaws becomes a bit of a joke and is used more for slapstick comedy gags. The producers clearly saw the potential of the character though, and he survived this movie to return in the following movie, Moonraker. Kurt Jurgens gives a creepy and unsettling performance as Stromberg. Some fans have criticised his character as being rather bland, but I have to disagree with that. His plan to destroy the world and start a new civilization is so bonkers and ambitious that I've always liked the way Jurgens contrasts this by underplaying the character. Stromberg was initially supposed to be Bond's old enemy Ernst Stavro Blofeld, but legal disputes between Albert Broccoli and Kevin McClory over the rights to the character prevented this from happening. In my opinion, this was a blessing in disguise, I'm glad the producers had to create new enemies for Bond to fight. Blofeld and Spectre had been used far too much in the Connery era of the series, and new kinds of villains added more variety to the movies. So overall, The Spy Who Loved Me is a fantastic Bond film. Like I said, it's my personal favourite. It's got everything you could possibly want in a 007 adventure. It also has the absolute best final line said by Bond in the final scene.
007, Triple X.
Bond, what do you think you're doing?
Keeping the British end up, sir.
The movie was a massive critical and box office smash. The future of the series was secured, and the only question was where Bond would go next. The end credits stated that Bond would return in For Your Eyes Only, but that plan was going to change dramatically. Released in 1979, Moonraker was once again directed by Lewis Gilbert. The plot involves Bond investigating the hijacking of the Moonraker space shuttle. This leaves Bond into conflict with billionaire industrialist Hugo Drax, played by Michael Lonsdale, who intends to wipe out humanity from his orbiting space station and restart civilization with a new master race. Bond teams up with a female CIA agent named Holly Goodhead, played by Louis Chills, and heads into space to once again save the world. While For Your Eyes Only was planned as the next Bond film after The Spy Who Loved Me, the late 1970s craze with movies and TV shows set in outer space meant Moonraker was chosen instead. This sudden high interest in space movies was caused by the huge success of a relatively low-budget space opera film released in 1977. You might have heard of it. With Star Wars breaking box office records everywhere, all of a sudden movie and TV studios decided to cash in on the new space craze with movies like Star Trek the Motion Picture, Battle Beyond the Stars, The Black Hole, and on television with Battlestar Galactica and Buck Rogers in the 25th century. The Bond movies, no stranger to following current trends, decided that James Bond had to go where he hadn't gone before, into outer space. Moonraker as a film bears practically no resemblance to Ian Fleming's novel, besides the name of the villain. While this is the movie that most people remember for sending Bond into outer space, this doesn't actually happen until the third act of the film. Well, this pushes the series into the realm of science fiction. Although Albert Broccoli would disagree.
We're not science fiction, we're in fact science fact.
For the most part, we get the standard Bond formula of exotic locations, beautiful women, cool gadgets, and incredible stunts. This film goes even bigger than the previous movie with the spectacle. Pre-credit sequence has Bond fighting an assassin in midair after being pushed out of a crashing plane. Even today, over 40 years later, this scene looks incredible and took over 80 jumps by the stuntman to film the sequence. Moonraker had over twice the budget of The Spy Who Loved Me, and it really shows. It's definitely one of the most glamorous Bond movies ever made, and the locations are some of the best in the series. Bond visits France, Vienna, and Rio de Janeiro. The sets, including Drax's hidden shuttle base in jungle, would be good enough for the climax of any other Bond film, but that's nothing compared to his orbiting space station. The model work for the outer space sequences still look great today, and is dated a lot better than the awful CGI work from Die Another Day, which came out over 20 years after Moonraker. The scene where the Moonrakers blast off into space is one of my absolute favourite scenes in the entire series. Combined with John Barry's incredible score, this entire sequence is absolutely beautiful. Michael Lonsdale plays Hugo Drax, and while on paper he could have come across as just a Karl Stromberg clone, Lonsdale plays the character with a great combination of quiet menace, but also a strange dark sense of humour.
Look after Mr. Bond. See that some harm comes to him.
As the movie goes on, he very slowly gets more obsessed with killing Bond in the most elaborate way possible. It's really only towards the end that you see him lose his cool when Jaws hesitates to execute Bond.
Jaws, you obey me. Expel him!
And yes, this movie featured the return of Jaws. It's good to have him back, even if his continuing efforts to kill Bond end up looking like something of a Roadrunner cartoon. The rivalry between him and Bond is a joy to watch, but while it's fun to see them eventually team up, I can't help but feel that Jaws should have stayed a villain. According to director Lewis Gilbert in his DVD commentary for the film, he got so much fan mail from children saying that they loved Jaws so much that they wanted him to be made a hero. So that's what Lewis did. Besides the outer space theme, Moonraker is notorious for really going overboard as far as the comedy goes. A lot of the humour in this film is pure slapstick, and many critics feel this is where the Bond movies went into full parody mode, and why Roger Moore's tenure was often given the label Carry On Bond. We even get a pigeon doing a double take as Bond cruises down the streets of Vienna in his hover gondola. What's often forgotten, however, is that the film does go into darker territory in some scenes. When Bond seduces Corinne Dufour, she's killed the next day by Drax's dogs in a sequence that looks like a stray out of a horror film. Also, the scene where two scientists are accidentally killed by poison gas is extremely scary. You can easily imagine these two scenes being from a Timothy Dalton or Daniel Craig Bond film. Louis Chiles plays the main Bond girl, Holly Goodhead, and while she's not one of the best Bond girls, she's not a great match for Bond like Anya in the last film. It's also good to see that Bond continues to hold women in such high esteem.
Can I help you?
Yes, my name is Bond. James Bond. I'm looking for Dr. Goodhead.
You just found her.
A woman?
This movie actually has the record for the most amount of women that Bond seduces. There's the enemy agent on the plane, Corinne Dufour in France, Manuela, Bond's contact in Rio, where he starts taking her clothes off literally within 2 minutes of beating her, and then of course, Holly Goodhead.
007. My God, what's Bond doing?
I think he's attempting re-entry, sir.
Overall, Moonraker may be extremely silly, but I don't care. It's simply just great fun. Despite critics not being so kind to this one, it was a huge success with audiences, and became at that time the highest grossing Bond film at the box office. Despite this huge success, the Bond producers later felt that they had taken the Bond character too far from his roots in the novels. There was only one way for Bond to go after this: back to basics.